The guest suite was a mausoleum of good taste, all muted grays and polished chrome, smelling faintly of lemon oil and loneliness. Ethan came to consciousness with a violent shudder, the memories of another man. A cruel, pathetic man named Ethan Vance, crashing into his own. He was the impotent scion of the Vance family, an alpha by birth but a failure by every other metric. A pained groan from the floor broke the sterile silence, followed by the soft scrape of knees on the thick pile rug. He forced his eyes open, and Omega, drenched in a feverish sweat, was on the floor before him. This was Caleb, his husband, and according to the nightmarish flood of information in Ethan's head, the protagonist of this story. A protagonist who would eventually become a killer. And Ethan, the original Ethan, was his first victim. He remembered what happened just 10 minutes ago. Caleb, in the throes of a desperate heat, had begged for the pheromones he was biologically dependent on. His body trembled, his own nails digging bloody furrows into his arms in a futile attempt to trade one pain for another. He had pleaded weakly for just a trace of relief. He could only ask Ethan, who had fully bonded with him a year prior, a mark that made Caleb's body crave his specific alpha signature and reject all others. It was a bond meant to be sacred, a promise of protection and comfort. But the original Ethan had twisted it into a tool of torture. After marking Caleb, he had never once offered the solace his body produced. He reveled in the power in the abject dependency. He'd pointed to the floor, telling Caleb to kneel. Then he had extended a polished leather shoe, giving a single vile command. Lick it. If Caleb licked his shoe, he'd said he would get his pheromones. The story's script played out in Ethan's new mind. Caleb, on the brink of death from pheromone deprivation, had complied. That single, grudgingly given drop of comfort saved his life. And after he'd eventually had his scent glands surgically removed, freeing himself from the bond, the first person he'd killed was Ethan. Not quickly. He had made it last a year. Now, in the present, Caleb's tongue flickered out, about to obey. A surge of horrified adrenaline shot through Ethan. He yanked his foot back so sharply he nearly fell off the bed. Caleb stared up at him with dead eyes, a flicker of resignation in them, as if he expected this new cruelty. Ethan's heart felt like a stone dropping into a cold sea. He recalled that during the last heat, the original Ethan had promised relief if Caleb barked like a dog. Caleb had done it, crawling on the expensive rug, but the promise was broken. He had been left to suffer through it alone. Caleb was expecting the same now. The sight was unbearable. Ethan felt an urgent, overwhelming need to flood the room with his pheromones, to soothe this agony. But as he moved closer, Caleb flinched back, scrambling away. His body screamed for proximity, but his mind screamed in terror. He clutched a dirty shirt Ethan had worn, burying his face in the faint scent clinging to the fabric, refusing the source himself. Pity and rage warred in Ethan's chest. He immediately released his pheromones, a scent of sandalwood and aged whiskey filling the air. Caleb's eyes widened, and he began to breathe it in, ragged and desperate, as if he'd forgotten how. The ambient scent wasn't enough. Ethan tore off the shirt he was wearing, saturated with a fresh and potent concentration, and held it out. Caleb hesitated, his fear battling his instinct, before snatching the garment. He clutched it to his chest, inhaling deeply, and fled the room without a backward glance, disappearing into his own small, dark bedroom. Ethan stood alone, the weight of another man's sins settling on him. A year of this cruelty had pushed Caleb's vitality to almost zero. It was monstrous. To mark someone, to bind them to you for life, and then to use that bond as a weapon. It was unforgivable. Subjectively, he hadn't done it. But objectively, they were the same person in Caleb's eyes. He knew Caleb would kill him. He accepted it. He deserved it. But before that happened, he would not let Caleb suffer anymore. An Omega who had their glands removed rarely lived past 40. In the story, Caleb died at 25. A strange, fierce protectiveness bloomed in Ethan's chest. Over the next few days, Ethan made a point of consistently releasing his pheromones, ensuring the air in the large, silent house was thick with them. He cooked meals, leaving trays outside Caleb's locked door. He would knock softly, informing Caleb that food was there for him when he was hungry. Next to the tray, he always placed a fresh piece of clothing, rich with his scent. After a long silence, the door would crack open just enough for a hand to snake out and retrieve the clothing. The food remained untouched, as if Caleb feared it was poisoned. A week later, Caleb's heat had passed safely. The subsequent ravenous hunger drove him from his room. Ethan found him in the kitchen late one night, rummaging through the refrigerator. The sight of Ethan startled him so badly that he dropped a carton of milk, which splattered across the marble floor. Ethan held up his hands gently, assuring him that he wasn't going to hurt him. The words only made Caleb tremble more violently. He backed away, his hand closing around the handle of a chef's knife from the block on the counter. Seeing the knife, Ethan's mind flashed to a scene from the book. Caleb using that same knife to hack at the electronic shackle on his ankle, desperate to escape, cutting his own leg in the process. The shackle was still there now, a sleek, cruel band of black metal. Ethan cursed the man whose body he inhabited. Without a word, he turned and sprinted upstairs. Following the ghost of a memory, he found a small key in a desk drawer. When he returned, Caleb was still frozen in place, knife held defensively. Ethan held up the key, stating clearly that he was going to unlock the shackle. He added that if Caleb felt threatened, he could use the knife. Caleb said nothing. Ethan approached slowly, knelt, and inserted the key. With a soft click, the shackle fell open. Caleb's throat worked. He managed a single word. "You." He didn't continue, but it was a start, an acknowledgement. Ethan was ecstatic. He knew an apology was meaningless. The only thing he could do was prevent Caleb from reaching the point of needing his glands removed, of dying so young. But without the glands, he'd always need Ethan's pheromones. Ethan went to a small, medical-grade freezer and removed a cryobox. Inside were 3 vials filled with a clear liquid, pure pheromones he'd extracted from his own glands over the past week. He explained that 1 vial taken before a heat would be enough to get through it safely. He promised to extract more. He just begged him not to remove his glands. He told Caleb he could leave now, that he wouldn't be stopped. Caleb watched him, then moved slowly. He took the cryobox and walked to the heavy front door. He opened it, but before stepping out into the night, he turned back. He said the name Ethan. Ethan answered instinctively. After Caleb left, his assistant called about signing some documents. It was then Ethan learned that as the eldest son of the Vance family, he had been shunted aside to manage a minor, failing subsidiary. He had the assistant send over the last year's corporate data. 2 hours of reading gave him a headache. The company was a disaster of nepotism and corruption. It was no wonder the family had no faith in the original Ethan. His management skills were non-existent. He began a ruthless overhaul, firing the incompetent and promoting the talented. He spent the next week in a whirlwind of dozens of meetings, trying to understand and restructure the entire operation. It was mentally exhausting. He also started a strict fitness regimen, disgusted by the soft, undisciplined body he'd inherited. He preferred a more ordered life, and besides, a healthier body would produce a higher quantity and quality of pheromones. He increased his extractions to twice every 3 days. Another week passed, and he started to feel a persistent sense of being watched. It was happening. Caleb was coming for him. The year of imprisonment and torture from the book was about to begin. That night, a cloth soaked in a sweet, chemical scent was pressed over his nose and mouth. He didn't fight it. As darkness consumed him, a single thought flitted through his mind. In the story, he was supposed to be knocked out with a club. He woke in a dim, musty room. Voices drifted from outside. One was Caleb's. The other, a doctor's, spoke in low tones about the dangers of frequent pheromone extraction, coupled with the ingestion of a hallucinogenic drug. The doctor mentioned he'd been unconscious for 4 days, but should be waking soon. For days. The door opened and closed. Footsteps approached. Caleb entered the room and saw Ethan sitting up. He recoiled as if struck, his entire body shaking with a severe stress reaction. Even though Ethan's hands were chained to the bed frame and an electronic shackle was on his ankle, Caleb was terrified. Ethan spoke, his voice raspy, telling him not to be afraid, that he couldn't move. There was no response from outside the room. The book hadn't detailed the specifics of this year of torment. He could only wait. An hour later, Caleb crept back. He held a knife in one hand and a takeout container in the other. He kicked the container into Ethan's reach. Ethan was starving. He would have eaten it even if it were poison. He opened it to find a large bowl of pho, the broth fragrant but covered in a thick blanket of cilantro. His nose wrinkled in disgust. He hated cilantro more than anything. He would have preferred poison. Ignoring his hunger for a moment, he began the painstaking process of picking out every green leaf. From the doorway, a small voice asked if he didn't eat cilantro. Ethan confirmed that he did not. After a long while, the task was done, and he devoured the now lukewarm noodles. His strength returned. He looked at Caleb, huddled by the door, and felt a pang of sympathy. He gestured with his head toward a jacket hanging on a hook. He told Caleb that the divorce papers were in the pocket, ready to be signed any time. The will was in there too, handwritten, which could be used as evidence. Caleb looked up at the mention of a will. Ethan explained that Caleb didn't have to wait a year to kill him, but he needed to extract enough pheromones first. He offered his own neck, asking for the tools to do it himself. After 4 days unconscious, he could surely provide 2 vials worth. Caleb glanced at the back of Ethan's neck, at the cluster of tiny puncture marks from the needle. His voice, small and tight, rose in pitch. He asked what Ethan was trying to figure out what was going on. It was simple, Ethan replied. The old Ethan hurt him, and now this body would pay the price. He deserved it. Caleb just muttered something and left, without leaving the extraction kit. He was held captive for a full week. Caleb rarely spoke to him. Their only interaction was when he would slide a takeout container into the room. Sometimes Ethan would wake in the middle of the night to find Caleb just watching him, as if trying to build up a tolerance to his presence. Ethan grew tired of the unhealthy takeout. He had a year to live. He wanted to help Caleb get healthier, to build up his frail, malnourished body. Around noon, he called out with a smile, asking if Caleb was tired of takeout, offering to cook. Caleb eyed him, his hand tightening on the remote for the shackle. Ethan assured him he could shock him if he made a wrong move. He just wanted to make them both a decent meal. After a long negotiation, Caleb agreed to unlock the chains on his hands, but not the shackle on his ankle. Ethan prepared a beautiful meal: seared steaks, roasted asparagus, and garlic mashed potatoes. Caleb sat at the far end of the small table. Seeing his apprehension, Ethan offered to go back to the other room until he was finished eating. Caleb mumbled that it wasn't necessary. Halfway through the meal, Ethan noticed Caleb was only eating the steak, pushing the vegetables around his plate. This wouldn't do. He gently admonished him, explaining that while protein was good, he needed the vitamins from the vegetables, that a balanced diet was important. Caleb shot him an annoyed look. A second later, a tingling, numbing sensation spread through Ethan's body. Caleb had given him a low-level shock, a clear to mind his own business. But Ethan held his gaze, and after a moment, Caleb hesitantly speared a piece of asparagus. As he was about to eat it, the front door of the small rental house exploded inward. 7 or 8 police officers stormed in, followed by a doctor who pointed at Ethan. The doctor told the police he'd seen this alpha chained to a bed, that the Omega was the culprit. An officer found the chains and held them up to Ethan, asking if he was being held against his will. They could arrest Caleb right now. This wasn't right. In the book, the first arrest wasn't for another year. Ethan looked at the doctor, recognizing the voice he'd heard when he first woke up. It was the doctor Caleb had called. He'd reported it. As all eyes turned to him, awaiting his testimony, he saw Caleb staring, a dark certainty in his eyes that Ethan would betray him. Instead, Ethan blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. It was a misunderstanding, he stammered, his face burning. Just some role play. The police didn't buy it. For everyone's safety, they took both of them to the station. There, Ethan frantically tried to explain that it was all a bizarre misunderstanding between a legally married couple. Caleb stood by silently, not resisting, not confirming. The police were firm, stating that an omega harming an alpha was a serious matter they had to investigate thoroughly. They promised to get to the bottom of it and deliver justice. Ethan wanted to scream that if anyone needed justice, it was Caleb. The world was so skewed against omegas. The investigation dragged on for hours. As the sun began to set, an imposing figure arrived. Arthur Vance, Ethan's grandfather. The family patriarch had always been fond of Caleb. When Caleb's aunt had effectively sold him to the Vances, Arthur had insisted on treating him with respect and had personally arranged the marriage, never suspecting his grandson was a monster in private. The old man walked into the station, his expression grim. Ethan felt a wave of shame. Caleb also spoke, murmuring to Arthur that he was sorry for the trouble. After a brief, forceful conversation between Arthur and the police captain, they were released. Arthur gave them both a stern lecture, then pulled Ethan aside to talk business. He'd heard the subsidiary was showing a profit, that he'd reviewed Ethan's recent work and saw great improvement. He announced he was putting Ethan in charge of a much larger affiliate company. He warned him not to revert to his old ways, reminding him that the Vance family legacy would one day be his. He then patted Caleb's arm affectionately, telling Ethan to take better care of his husband, to get him out of the house more. As they watched the old man's car pull away, Ethan couldn't help but hear his final words, tossed out the window. "Youth is one thing, but don't play so rough." They stood awkwardly in front of the police station. Caleb took a step back, increasing the distance between them. The silence was broken by a loud growl from his stomach. He hadn't finished his lunch. Ethan asked what he wanted to eat. On the way, Caleb pointed to a brightly lit steakhouse. They were seated in a quiet booth. Ethan ordered for them both a variety of appetizers, 2 large steaks, and several side dishes. Caleb ate in silence. Ethan noticed him gravitating toward the spicier sauces and gently suggested he take it easy, that it wasn't good for his stomach. Caleb glanced at him, then deliberately dipped a piece of steak into the milder sauce, as if to show he was listening, before immediately going back to the spicy one. Ethan pressed, suggesting he could alternate 1 mild bite for every spicy one, to gradually change his habits. Caleb's hand stilled. He spoke quietly, saying Ethan reminded him of a friend he used to have, who said the exact same things. Ethan asked where he'd gone to college. "King's College," he answered, reciting the information from the original Ethan's file. Caleb then asked if he had any profound memories from that time. Ethan had no memories before waking up in this world, so he lied, claiming he didn't remember much. Caleb didn't respond, just stared down at his plate, his fork scraping against the ceramic. Ethan, remembering the friend, asked if he was an alpha. He asked if Caleb had feelings for him. A rare flash of irritation crossed Caleb's face. Ethan suggested that Caleb could seek this friend out now that he was free. Caleb said dismissively that the man probably wouldn't even recognize him if he was standing right in front of him. After a moment of silence, Ethan pulled out the divorce papers again. He urged Caleb to sign them, stating he would give up all marital assets. A bitter, humorless smile touched Caleb's lips. He asked if Ethan was trying to divorce him now that he was taking over a big company, worried Caleb would get a share of the new profits. Ethan quickly denied it, saying it was to give Caleb peace of mind, to free him. But he could see how it looked. He conceded, putting the papers away for now. He began looking through the portfolio his grandfather had given him. The new company was significant, roughly the same size as the one owned by Caleb's aunt. The mention of her name made a vein pulse in Caleb's temple. 2 years ago, Caleb's alpha father had fallen gravely ill. He had given his sister, Carol, a substantial sum of money to care for Caleb after he was gone. She had played the part of the loving aunt perfectly until his father died. Then she'd immediately sold Caleb to the Vance family in exchange for a business partnership. Caleb's eyes were filled with hatred. He asked, his voice tight, if Ethan was planning to help them. Ethan wiped his hands with a napkin. He replied that he was going to make them live a life worse than death. The people who loved money and power so much would learn what it was like to have neither. They came to an arrangement. Ethan could go to work during the day to earn more money for Caleb, as he framed it, but he had to return to Caleb's rental house at night to remain his prisoner. A few days later, Carol, Caleb's aunt, arrived at his new office with a large floral arrangement. "Congratulations, nephew-in-law," she cooed. The show was beginning. Ethan accepted the flowers with a warm smile, complimenting her thoughtfulness. After some small talk, she got to the point, reminding him how her precious nephew was married to him, and now that he was successful, he had a duty to help her family. He assured her he was deeply grateful. Then, he put on a troubled expression and shook his head. He told her that he was facing a difficult situation. He confided in her, closing his office door for privacy. He explained that to justify his grandfather's renewed faith, he was planning a massive investment. He'd found a plot of land that his analysts predicted would increase in value 1,000-fold in 3 years. He claimed his grandfather was also invested in the project, so all of the company's current capital was tied up. He expressed his deep regret that he couldn't help her at this moment. Avarice gleamed in her eyes. She asked which piece of land it was. Ethan gave her a vague description, emphasizing how crucial it was to his future success. He promised that once the deal was done, helping her would be a simple matter. They were family after all. She left his office smiling, empty-handed but feeling as if she'd struck gold. He knew she would try to steal the deal for herself. Within 2 days, she'd instructed her mole inside his company to steal the bid proposal. A copy was duly printed and emailed to her. The proposal stated their maximum bid was $50 million, the entirety of the affiliate company's liquid assets. At the auction, Ethan and his assistant sat calmly. Carol was there, looking triumphant. The auctioneer began the bidding at $5 million. After a few smaller bids, Ethan's assistant raised his paddle. $30 million. A gasp went through the room. Just as the auctioneer was about to close, Carol's assistant raised their paddle. $50 million and $100,000. The room fell silent. The hammer fell. It was hers. Carol stood up and offered Ethan a pitying smile, telling him the land was theirs now. Ethan smiled back, even more brightly. He knew that the geological survey, which was conveniently not included in the bid proposal, showed the land was unsuitable for any kind of construction. He'd heard she took out high-interest loans to secure the funds. As he left, he overheard other developers muttering in confusion, wondering why anyone would pay that much for a potential small-scale amusement park. He texted Caleb the news immediately. Caleb's reply was a picture of a cartoon character with hearts in its eyes, which he quickly deleted a second later. Ethan smiled. Over the past month, Caleb had slowly been coming back to life. That evening, Ethan brought home a small red velvet cake. He'd bought it several times now. The first time, Caleb had asked in surprise how he knew it was his favorite. Ethan didn't have an answer, he just knew. He'd shrugged and called it an alpha's intuition. Caleb was studying now, preparing for the LSATs. Ethan had hired tutors and bought him stacks of prep books. He watched as Caleb sat at his desk, eating the cake with meticulous little bites, like a rabbit. He looked healthier, the haunted gauntness in his cheeks softening. Ethan reminded him that he needed to take him shopping for a new suit the next day. There was a corporate gala he needed to attend. After getting a mumbled affirmative, Ethan retreated to his room, the one where he had first been held captive. Before sleeping, he locked the chains on his own hands, tossing the key outside the door. He'd done this every night for the past month. He was himself now, but he feared the original Ethan might somehow resurface. He had to keep this body under control. The next day, they went to the city's most exclusive shopping district. Caleb stepped out of the car and stretched, closing his eyes against the breeze. He joked that it would be perfect if a $100 bill blew into his face. Ethan laughed, pulling out his black CR card and flicking it at him. "Will a bank card do?" Caleb caught it deftly. "Thanks, honey." The endearment hung in the air between them. Caleb froze, his eyes wide. Then he turned and bolted toward a storefront. "I'll go pick out the suit." Ethan called after him to slow down, a genuine smile on his face that was quickly followed by a familiar ache in his chest. How could anyone have wanted to hurt someone so full of life? The news of Carol's disastrous land purchase broke soon after. The failed geological tests sent her to the hospital with a stress-induced heart condition. To add to her misery, Ethan anonymously forwarded the evidence of her corporate espionage to the police. Trapped between loan sharks and law enforcement, with a worthless plot of land to her name, her fate was sealed. His own company, meanwhile, was thriving. His grandfather called him to the family estate and, in front of the extended family, promoted him to vice president of Vance Industries. The gala was to be his official debut in this new role. He didn't want anything to go wrong. But his cousin Derek, an alpha director at the company for years, was deeply jealous of Ethan's sudden rise. Fueled by alcohol, Derek decided to attack him personally. He bellowed across the ballroom, for all to hear, that while Ethan might look the part, he was famously impotent. He crudely joked that Ethan should just go back to his little company since he couldn't produce an heir anyway. Ethan calmly replied that Derek's behavior was a disgrace to the family name, and that his pettiness showed why Ethan was rising while he was stagnating. Beside him, Caleb was furious. He stepped forward, retorting loudly that everyone should ignore Derek's lies. He placed a hand on his own flat stomach, announcing that he and his husband were trying to conceive, that a baby was on its way. The crowd gasped. Ethan was just as shocked. Derek, realizing he'd miscalculated, drunkenly stumbled away, but not before deliberately slamming his 200-pound frame into Ethan. The impact sent Ethan crashing against a wall. A sharp pain lanced through his arm. Blood dripped from his sleeve onto the carpet. Someone shouted for a doctor. Caleb pulled him upstairs to an empty room, ignoring his protests that it was just a scratch. The doctor arrived quickly. Caleb insisted Ethan pull up his sleeve for treatment. When he resisted, Caleb, frustrated, yanked the material up himself. The sight beneath was horrifying. A fresh, bleeding gash from the collision lay across a lattice of older, faded scars, all clearly made by a blade. Caleb froze. The doctor knelt, murmuring that these were knife wounds, not scrapes. The older ones were at least a week old. Ethan's mind drifted. He knew this world was a story, that he was an intruder. He'd seen it all unfold as if watching a film, seen how Caleb was broken down from a bright, happy young man into a killer. When he'd first arrived, he was filled with a vicarious rage, a need for vengeance on Caleb's behalf, against everyone, including himself. The story never detailed his punishment during the captivity, but he knew it wasn't supposed to be this gentle. Caleb had chosen a different path, but Ethan couldn't forgive himself. If Caleb wouldn't hurt him, he would do it himself. Back at the rental house, Caleb stormed into Ethan's room and tore it apart. He found a small, locked safe. He tried Ethan's birthday. Nothing. He tried another date. It opened. The password was his own birthday. Inside was a knife and more than a dozen vials of pheromones. Caleb confronted him, holding up the vials, his voice shaking with fury. He asked why Ethan was still extracting when he had forbidden it. Ethan mumbled it was just in case. Caleb cut him off. "Do you really think I can't tell the difference between you and him?" Ethan stared, stunned. Caleb knew. "I'm not blind," Caleb snapped. Ethan's bravado crumbled. He confessed that he couldn't forgive what the other soul had done. He hated that he couldn't have arrived sooner. Caleb's anger softened. He told Ethan he couldn't hurt himself just to punish a ghost. He said that he didn't blame him. He added softly, "It's good that you came back. You are forbidden from hurting yourself again. Do you hear me?" Ethan remained silent. Sometimes the compulsion was too strong. It was the original Ethan's fault, but this body was the only connection, the only thing he could punish. Seeing his stubborn silence, Caleb's anger flared again. He grabbed the knife and held it against his own arm. Ethan cried out in alarm, begging him to put it down. He couldn't bear to see Caleb hurt. He promised that for every new scar he found on Ethan, he would make 2 on himself. The threat landed. Ethan promised, quickly and sincerely, that he would listen. Caleb dropped the knife. Ethan hung his head, muttering about his fear that the other one might return. Caleb stepped forward and stomped on his foot. "Do you think I'm not afraid? Do you think the shackle you wear every night is for decoration? I know what it can do. One flicker of him and I will electrocute you. Got it?" Ethan was stunned into submission. He nodded. Caleb sat down, taking a deep breath. After a long moment he spoke, his voice serious. "Ethan, I need you to listen. I can tell you apart. I know it doesn't make sense, 2 souls in one body. But some things don't make sense. All we can do is accept it. Does he feel pain when you hurt this body? No. Only you do. You have to break this cycle. When you feel that way, don't dwell on the bad things. Think of the good things. That's how I got through it. We all have the right to choose to be happy. Don't let him drag you down." His words settled deep in Ethan's heart. The small room felt warm, the air thick with unspoken understanding. When their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. Caleb confiscated the knife and the vials, then gently bandaged Ethan's arm until it resembled a mummy's. The next day, with his arm heavily bandaged, Ethan couldn't cook. Caleb announced he would handle it. He emerged from the bedroom wearing a welding mask and heavy gloves and marched into the kitchen. Ethan braced for an explosion. Miraculously, the kitchen survived, and Caleb emerged with a single plate of scrambled eggs. He proudly offered Ethan a bite. Ethan chewed thoughtfully. "The salt is cooked perfectly," he announced. "There's even a hint of egg." Caleb took a bite himself, then immediately chugged an entire bottle of water. They decided to eat out. On their way, they passed a man on a street corner, dressed in flowing robes, with a young boy at his side. The man was chanting, "One body, 2 souls. One wanes, the other grows. The soul from another world must not remain." Ethan stopped. He asked the man if he knew something. The man stroked a long, fake-looking beard. "You are 1 body, 2 souls." Ethan's eyes widened. Caleb nodded. "He is. And he's got some issues. Can you fix him?" The man made a great show of calculating on his fingers. "Can be done. But a fee is required to avert disaster." So that was it. A charlatan. Ethan relaxed. He asked how much. The man replied that the price depended on how much Ethan valued his own life. Honestly, Ethan didn't value it much. But he took out his phone and scanned the man's QR code. A notification pinged. Payment sent 0, 10, a dime. That's what his conscience dictated. The man's face fell. He begrudgingly pulled a small red pouch from his bag and tossed it to Ethan, grumbling that it should resolve the issue within 3 days. Ethan then gestured to Caleb, asking if he could buy a protective charm for him as well. The man clutched his bag, looking reluctant, but professional duty won out. He sighed that the protection would match the payment. Ethan scanned the code again. Payment sent, 1 million. The daily transfer limit was reached. He promised to send more the next day. The young boy's jaw dropped. The man moved with supernatural speed, producing a golden amulet from his bag and presenting it with both hands, his demeanor now one of utmost reverence. He promised this charm would protect against all disasters, even death itself, but that they would not be seeing him again tomorrow. With that, he grabbed the boy and fled. Ethan handed the amulet to Caleb. As Caleb took it, it burst into flames, burning to ash in his hand. Ethan sighed. They'd been scammed. 2 days later, Ethan went to pick up a custom-tailored suit for Caleb. A man stopped him on the street. "Ethan Vance?" The man introduced himself as Alex, a college classmate. He reminded Ethan that he'd borrowed his camera years ago and never returned it. Since he lived nearby, he offered to go get it if Ethan would wait at a cafe. While he waited, Caleb texted him, "Your little prince is waiting for you at home. Patience level at 1%. Ethan smiled and texted back that he was at the mall picking up a suit for him, sending his live location when Caleb asked for it. Caleb's reply was, "Just checking to see where my heart has wandered off to." Alex returned with a black camera. He mentioned that Ethan had disappeared right after graduation. He handed it over, saying the memory card was still inside. Ethan took it and idly clicked through a folder. A photo stopped him cold. It was a picture of two people. One was himself. The other, though only half his face was visible, was unmistakably Caleb. His hand trembled. He pointed at the screen and asked Alex why Caleb was in this picture. Alex looked confused. "Isn't that your boyfriend?" Ethan stood on the sidewalk, the camera bag heavy on his shoulder, his mind a whirlwind. Every cryptic thing Caleb had said clicked into place. "Don't you eat cilantro? Where did you go to college? You remind me of a friend. He wouldn't even recognize me. It's good that you came back. When you got married, Caleb was so happy. He had one thought. He had to get home. He had to ask Caleb." A glare of headlights. A car speeding toward him from the side street. The driver's eyes were fixed on him. He was standing under a sign that read King's College. A bright, clear voice was saying, "Be my boyfriend. Did you hear me?" He turned. It was an Omega, impossibly radiant, with a lollipop stick jutting from the corner of his mouth. He knew him. It was Caleb, who had simultaneously won the awards for Sweetest Omega and Most Violent Omega on campus. Caleb tilted his chin up, whispering conspiratorially, "Do you know how good I am in bed?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How good?" Caleb's chin went higher. "I can sleep for a whole day without eating or drinking." Ethan's heart, which had been in his throat, plummeted. He had assumed, well, he heard his own voice ask how many ex-boyfriends Caleb had. Caleb grinned, saying they weren't exes, just good friends he'd happened to kiss. Annoyed, Ethan turned to leave. Caleb grabbed his arm, suddenly anxious, and confessed, "Okay, Fine. I've never had a boyfriend. You're the first one. It's embarrassing for a guy like me to have no experience. My first kiss is still up for grabs, you know." Ethan laughed. He held out his hand. "Come on. I'll walk you home." Caleb swung their joined hands. "Is that a yes? Did you agree?" "Yes." Caleb beamed, his teeth flashing. "So, can we kiss now?" "Yes, but..." The real Caleb's voice cut through the memory. Ethan's eyes flew open. He remembered. Everything. This body was his. It had always been his. A soul from another world had hijacked it for 3 years. When he'd returned, a ghost in his own shell, that other soul's presence had slowly weakened. The old mystic was right. One wanes, the other grows. The moment his memories returned, the other soul had been snuffed out completely. He looked at Caleb, sitting beside his hospital bed, peeling an apple. He realized Caleb had known all along that he had amnesia. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked, his voice thick. Caleb smiled, the late afternoon sun catching in his hair. "I was guiding you. I was dropping hints. But if you never remembered, we would have just started over. You would have fallen in love with me again, wouldn't you?" Time seemed to stop, the moment crystallizing around them. It was him. It had always been him. The investigation into the car accident concluded that it was, as he suspected, Derek's doing. After being publicly humiliated and demoted by their grandfather, His cousin's resentment had festered into murderous rage. The man he hired had lost his nerve at the last second, however, resulting in 2 broken ribs for Ethan instead of death. Derek was now facing a lengthy prison sentence. In Ethan's jacket pocket, the red pouch from the street mystic had turned to dust. The night he was finally released from the hospital, Caleb went into heat. Ethan built a nest for him on the bed, piling it high with clothes saturated with his pheromones. He was exhausted and sweating, but the concentrated scent should have been enough to get Caleb through the night peacefully. As he turned to leave, Caleb grabbed his sleeve, murmuring that he wanted to sleep on an 8-pack of abs. Ethan warned him that was a bad idea. The impotence curse had only applied to the other soul, a price for his possession. Since his own awakening, Ethan was a perfectly normal alpha. Caleb was in heat, his own scent intoxicatingly sweet. If he stayed, he might lose control. It was better to wait. Taking advantage of him now wouldn't be right. Caleb whimpered, playing his trump card. "No. But we have to make a baby. We need one. We need one." The words sent ripples through Ethan. He gritted his teeth, made a decision, and shut the door. He turned back toward the bed. To hell with being a good person. Epilogue. The previous life. My name is Caleb. I just finished killing my aunt's family. 2 days ago, I killed my husband. A rambling old mystic ran up to me, crying that he was too late. I smiled and asked who he was, already planning how to kill him, too. He said he was an agent of Providence, that a foreign soul illegally possessing a body was his failure. My husband, Ethan Vance, had been a victim of that possession. I scoffed. I'd known that for a long time. It's the only reason I let him live for that extra year. The mystic made a gesture in the air and a tiny flame appeared in his palm. "This is what's left of Ethan's soul," he said. It was so small. I asked if it could be resurrected. He said it could, in a new life, but it would require the fire of my remaining lifespan to protect it on its journey. "Fine," I said. And so, my life ended at 25. The judge of the underworld wept after reviewing my life. He sympathized with my suffering but said murder was still wrong. I nodded. I accepted my fate. But as I was about to be sentenced to obliteration, a golden charm descended from the heavens. The judge announced that Providence itself had granted me a pardon, a chance at rebirth. I found myself back in my own body, in a world reset. A newborn, but this time with all my memories. The judge had told me that in this timeline, there would be no foreign souls. Time passed. I grew. I watched over my father vigilantly, catching his illness at the earliest stage and ensuring he received treatment. To ensure I would never be weak again, I ate well and trained hard. By junior high, I was 6'1" with an 8-pack. For high school, I moved to Ethan's city. At this point, none of us had presented our secondary gender. In my past life, I was an Omega. This time, medical tests predicted with 99% certainty that I would be an Alpha. When I saw him again in the same class, he was just as I remembered him, the real him. Tall, elegant, with long lashes and an air of quiet nobility. The sight of the other soul in this body had made me want to kill. The sight of this boy made me want to protect. "Hi," I said.
"I'm Caleb."
"Ethan Vance," he replied softly. "We were husbands in our last life. We could be brothers in this one. It was a good arrangement. We were desk mates for 3 years and chose the same college. I presented as an alpha in my sophomore year, but Ethan didn't present at all through high school. At the graduation party, he pulled me away from a crowd of Omegas who were confessing their feelings to me. He was quiet for a long time. "What's wrong?" I asked. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Caleb, feel my shirt." I touched the silk fabric. It was smooth. I nodded. He looked up, the moonlight catching in his eyes. "Is it good enough material for your boyfriend?" I froze. Then I smelled it. A sweet, intoxicating scent. It was coming from him. He had presented. As an Omega. Yes, I found myself grinning. "It is. So much for being brothers." We'd be husbands in this life, too.